He told me never to go to the lake house, not once, not even to look. So when he died, and I found out he'd secretly bought it back 3 years ago, I packed a bag before sunrise. I didn't call anyone. I didn't ask permission. I just drove. I thought I was going there to grieve, to sit on a dock and cry where he once stood. But when I turned that key, I realized something wasn't right. And when his brothers pulled up to that gate, confident, polished, already prepared, they thought they were walking into a simple inheritance. They thought I was just a grieving widow. They were wrong, because what my husband left behind wasn't land, it was timing, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. I didn't know it yet, but that lake house was never meant to be avoided. It was meant to be defended. Before I tell you what I found inside that house, thank you for sitting with me. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, tell me where you are in the comments. I always wonder where these stories land, and if quiet strength means something to you, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to the life I thought I understood. For 29 years, I was married to a man who never slammed a door. Mark didn't argue loud. He didn't brag. He didn't hide receipts in secret drawers. He was steady. Every Sunday, he made pancakes. Not because I asked, because he liked watching me sit at the kitchen table with my coffee while the house smelled like butter and syrup. He'd flip the pancakes too early sometimes. I'd tease him. He'd shrug and say, "You married me for my charm, not my timing." That was our rhythm. Simple, familiar. Tessa used to sit at that same table, swinging her legs when she was little. Later, she'd call before noon, even after she moved to Chicago. It became a ritual. Mark would wipe his hands on a towel and say, "Put her on speaker." We weren't rich, we weren't flashy, but we were solid. At least, I believed we were. I gave up painting the year Tessa was born, not because Mark told me to, he never would have. But daycare bills don't wait for creative seasons, neither do mortgage payments. So I boxed up my brushes, told myself it was temporary. Mark would lean against the doorframe of our bedroom sometimes and say, "You'll get back to it, Lainey. Someday." Someday became a word we both leaned on. Someday we'd travel more. Someday we'd slow down. Someday I'd set up a studio. Then one Tuesday afternoon, someday ended. Mark had just finished mowing the lawn. I remember the smell of cut grass drifting in through the screen door. He stepped inside, set his keys on the counter, smiled at me. Then he reached for the edge of the table. And he fell. No warning, no goodbye. The paramedic spoke in short, efficient sentences. The doctor used the phrase, "massive cardiac event." I nodded like I understood what that meant. I signed papers I don't remember reading. I drove home alone. The house felt louder without him. Every appliance hummed like it was trying to fill space. Tessa flew in the next morning. She clung to me in the airport parking lot and cried into my shoulder. I didn't cry right away. I washed his coffee mug. I folded his shirts. I changed the batteries in the hallway, smoke detector, because it started chirping. Grief hid itself inside chores. 2 weeks after the funeral, his attorney called. "There's one more matter we need to discuss," he said. I assumed it was insurance paperwork, maybe a retirement account. Instead, he placed a small cedar box in front of me. I remember the sound it made when it touched the desk. Soft, solid. Inside was a brass key, worn smooth from use. And an envelope with my name written in Mark's handwriting, not rushed, careful. "Your husband repurchased a property in northern Michigan 3 years ago," the attorney said. Cedar Hollow. The name made something twist in my stomach. Mark had told me about that lake house from his childhood. Not warmly, not with nostalgia, just fragments. Cold winters, hard work, a father who expected too much. And once years ago, when I suggested we visit it, he went quiet, then firm. Never go to the lake house, Elaine. Promise me. I had laughed at first. He didn't. So I promised. Because when someone you love looks at you like that, you don't push. Now I was sitting in an office, being told he had bought it back. 3 years ago, without telling me. Taxes prepaid, the attorney added. Full deed transfer to you. My hands tightened around the key. And there's more, he said carefully. The surrounding area has recently drawn commercial development interest. Resorts, infrastructure, mineral surveys, the kind of interest that turns quiet land into valuable land. Your husband declined multiple purchase inquiries, he said. That part didn't fit. We lived comfortably. Teacher's salary, engineering income, but not secret lake house investment comfortably. I opened the letter, my name at the top. Laney, it began. If you're reading this, I ran out of time. I stopped breathing for a second. He had known. He had known something I didn't. He wrote that he was releasing me from the promise, that I should go there, just once, before deciding what to do with it. There's a laptop in the house, he wrote. The password is the date we met. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it against my chest without thinking. Tessa thought it was strange. Dad hid property from us, she said later, pacing our kitchen. That's not normal. No, it wasn't. But neither was the way his jaw tightened whenever Cedar Hollow came up. There had been history there, old history. I booked a flight the next morning. Tessa wanted to come. I shook my head. I need to see it first, I told her. Alone. When I drove up to the gate at Cedar Hollow, I didn't feel brave. I felt steady. The iron bars were freshly painted. The gravel driveway was maintained. This wasn't an abandoned cabin. This was curated. I sat in the car longer than I expected. Key in my palm. Cold metal warming against my skin. Then I stepped out. The gate opened smoothly. Too smoothly. As if it had been used recently. The house came into full view. Wide windows, new siding, wraparound porch. Nothing about it matched the rough childhood stories Mark had told. This wasn't a memory preserved. It was something rebuilt. I climbed the porch steps slowly. Every board felt solid under my feet. I slid the key into the front door. It turned without resistance. When I stepped inside, the air didn't feel abandoned. It felt prepared. And that's when I realized something quiet but unsettling. Mark hadn't just hidden a property. He had built something in silence. And whatever he built was about to draw attention. Because the peace I thought I had carried with me was already thinning. And I could feel it, but that peace was about to end. The door shut behind me with a soft click. The house didn't echo. It held sound. Fresh wood, lake air, clean stone. Someone had cared for this place recently. I took 3 slow steps into the living room and stopped. The walls were covered, not with family photos, not with landscapes, paintings, horses in motion, women standing near water, stormlight breaking through trees. I moved closer. My fingers hovered over one canvas. It wasn't mine, but it felt like mine. The brushwork, the angles, the way the sky split open. It mirrored a painting I'd sold in college for rent money. Mark had remembered. He had studied my old style, rebuilt it in someone else's hands. Across the room, a door stood slightly open. I walked toward it slowly. Inside was a studio, north-facing windows. Perfect light. Easels positioned with intention. New brushes laid out in neat rows. My name was engraved on a small brass plate attached to the drafting table. Elaine Parker. My throat tightened. 27 years since I'd held a brush seriously, and here was a room waiting like I'd never left. On the desk sat a silver laptop. A single white lily rested across the keyboard. Not dramatic, just placed. My hands trembled as I opened it. Password. The 14th of June, 1994. The county fair. Lemonade. He spilled mustard on his shirt. The screen unlocked. A folder labeled, "For Elaine." Before I could click crunch. Gravel shifting under tires. My body stiffened. Through the studio window, I saw a black SUV roll through the gate. No hesitation. They knew how to open it. 3 men stepped out, Robert in front, Alan behind him, and a third I hadn't met before, Mark's brothers. They didn't look uncertain, they looked prepared. I closed the laptop gently, lowered the lid without panic, locked the front door. The knock came seconds later. Firm, measured. "Elaine," Robert's voice carried through the wood. "We know you're inside." I didn't answer. Another knock. "We just want to talk." I opened the laptop again, pressed play. Mark appeared on screen. Healthy, upright, calm. "Hi, Lainey." My breath hitched. "If you're watching this, they're probably already there." Knocking resumed. He gave the smallest smile. "I didn't tell you about Cedar Hollow because I needed time." The knocking grew louder. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. The words landed like ice. Same thing that took my father. I gripped the edge of the desk. "They gave me 2 to 5 years. I didn't want you counting them." A shadow moved across the front window. "They'll come for it," Mark continued evenly. "Not because they care about the house, because they understand the development map. Development." So it was true. In the bottom drawer is a blue folder. Everything is signed, notarized, transferred. A loud thud hit the front door. "Open up," Alan called. "We have a right to inspect." Mark leaned slightly closer to the camera. "They'll question my state of mind. They'll say I wasn't thinking clearly." Another thud. "They'll try to pull Tessa into it." As if summoned, my phone buzzed. Tessa. I stepped into the hallway and answered quietly. "Mum," she whispered. "Dad's brothers just called me." "Of course they did. They're saying the property is legally complicated," she said. "They offered to protect my share if I support their claim." Protect my share. Clean language, strategic wording. I closed my eyes for a second. "Tessa," I said softly, "don't sign anything. Mum, if this is worth what they say, it's not about what it's worth today." There was a pause. "You sound different," she said. I looked at the front door, shaking under another knock. "I feel different." That seemed to steady her. "I'll wait," she said finally. When I hung up, I walked to the door, unlocked it. Robert stood straight-backed in a grey suit. Smile, controlled. "Thank you," he said, stepping just inside without being invited. Alan followed. The third man stayed near the SUV. "We need to discuss the property," Robert began smoothly. "You mean the one legally transferred to me?" I replied. His smile thinned. "We believe Mark wasn't in a stable condition when these decisions were made. There it was, undermining, not grieving, not remembering, strategizing." "Interesting," I said calmly, "because his paperwork is very thorough." Alan stepped forward. "Family land deserves family division." I met his eyes. "I am family." Silence. It shifted something. Robert recovered quickly. "We're proposing fairness. 1/3 to you, 1/3 to Tessa, 1/3 to us." "And the development interest?" I asked quietly. He hesitated half a beat too long. "Speculative." But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part wasn't greed. It was assumption. They had already decided I would fold. That grief made me negotiable. Robert leaned slightly closer. "This doesn't need to become adversarial." I looked at the lake behind him. Still water. Late afternoon light. "I don't plan on making it adversarial," I said softly. "I plan on making it accurate." He didn't like that. They stayed another 5 minutes. Polished language. Subtle pressure. Then they left with a promise of legal review. As their SUV disappeared down the drive, I stood on the porch. Didn't shake. Didn't cry. I went back inside, closed the door, sat in that studio, pressed play on the next video, because this wasn't about defending land. It was about understanding timing, and I had the feeling they were already running out of it. That's when I knew I would not stay silent, not loudly, but strategically. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay on my back in the bedroom Mark rebuilt, staring at the ceiling beams he had chosen. The house made small sounds, wood settling, wind brushing the siding, water tapping the dock, alive. My chest felt heavy, but not chaotic, just full. Around 2 in the morning, I got up. The floor was cool under my feet. I opened the dresser and found one of Mark's flannel shirts folded neatly in the back. I slipped it on. The sleeves were too long. I rolled them once, twice. Grief doesn't always arrive as tears. Sometimes it's standing in a kitchen you didn't know existed, tracing your fingers along a counter your husband sanded smooth while you were home grading papers. I opened the laptop again, pressed play. Mark stood by the dock in this one, wind moving his hair slightly. "I kept this from you because I didn't want fear in our house," he said. "I wanted Sundays to stay Sundays." I swallowed. He talked about roof repairs, about septic permits, about the dock reinforcement, but then he said something quieter. "You postponed yourself for years, Lainey. I didn't want that to be permanent." I sat down on the studio floor, back against the wall, and for the first time since he died, I cried. Not loudly, just enough. Morning came pale and grey. I made coffee without thinking. Muscle memory. The mug felt too light in my hand. Tessa called before 10. "They invited me to dinner," she said. "With them?" "Yes." Her voice was careful. "They showed me old pictures of Dad, stories I never heard." I leaned against the kitchen counter. Grief is persuasive. It makes you want connection, even if it's complicated. "They're being generous," she added. "Of course they are," I said gently. Silence. "They offered to guarantee my portion if I support a joint sale." I didn't rush to respond. I didn't argue. I just looked out the window at the western tree line. "Tessa," I said softly, "when someone rushes you, ask yourself who benefits from speed." Another pause. "I hate that this feels strategic," she admitted. "It is strategic," I said. "That doesn't mean it isn't emotional too," she exhaled slowly. "I'll wait," she said. That was enough. After we hung up, I drove into town, county clerk's office. Plain beige walls, fluorescent lights. I verified the deed transfer, reviewed the survey lines, confirmed tax prepayment. Everything was exact, every signature notarized, every transfer clean. Mark hadn't acted impulsively. He had been meticulous. Back at Cedar Hollow, I walked the property. Not hurried, just observing. The western section looked ordinary at first glance. Brush, slight incline, less picturesque than the east side, which made it easy to underestimate. Inside the hallway, I noticed a frame slightly crooked. Behind it was a small safe, combination written neatly on the back of the frame. He knew I'd look there eventually. Inside were documents, geological surveys, infrastructure projections, preliminary commercial interest letters. I sat at the kitchen table and spread them out. The development expansion map angled west, not east. The brothers' offer had focused entirely on dividing the east side, the scenic side, the immediate side. Not the strategic side. They weren't just after value, they were after control before the next shift. My phone buzzed again. Robert. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. "Elaine, we're hearing rumors about zoning movement. You should consider acting quickly." Acting quickly. I replayed Mark's voice in my mind. Value isn't what it is today, it's what it becomes tomorrow. That night, I stood on the dock, watched the sun lower itself into the lake. The water didn't rush. It didn't react. It just held its surface. I realized something then. They believed grief made me fragile. It didn't. It made me careful. Careful reads maps. Careful studies timing. Careful waits. I went back inside and opened my laptop. Not Mark's. Mine. I researched development attorneys in Detroit. Found one Mark's old engineering colleague had once mentioned. I didn't tell Tessa. I didn't alert anyone. I just listened. Asked questions about holding structures. About lease agreements versus outright sale. About long-term control. By the end of that call, something settled inside me. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about positioning. And positioning is quiet power. That evening, Tessa drove up without warning. She walked in and stopped in the studio doorway. "You look steadier," she said. "I am," I replied. She stepped inside slowly. "This place feels intentional," she said. "It is." We watched another video together. Mark leaned on the porch railing in this one. "If they try to divide you," he said gently, "remember, money reveals intention, time reveals character." Tessa's fingers tightened around mine. We didn't need to speak. The next morning, I filed a preliminary notice of development interest. Nothing flashy, just documentation, just signal. By the time Robert called again, my hands didn't shake when I answered. "Have you reconsidered our proposal?" he asked. "I have," I said calmly. "And?" "I'm not selling." A pause. "You're being emotional," he replied. I ran my thumb along the edge of the table. Smooth wood. "No," I said quietly. "I'm being patient." Silence. He shifted tone. "Holding land costs money." "Good thing the taxes are prepaid," I said. That caught him. He didn't know that. They were operating on assumption. I was operating on preparation. When the call ended, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned. Aligned with Mark's foresight. Aligned with my own instincts. And as I walked back toward the dock that evening, I understood something clearly. They thought they were negotiating property. I was preserving timing. And timing is leverage. I began to think very carefully. Because the next video I opened later that night didn't just confirm the map. It revealed the final layer of Mark's plan. And I realized they had already underestimated me once. They wouldn't get a second chance. Not if I moved quietly enough. The next video was only 4 minutes long. Mark wasn't smiling in this one. He stood near the western tree line, wind moving through the tall grass behind him. "If you're watching this," he said, "they've already come." He didn't look angry. He looked certain. "They won't shout," he continued. "They'll talk about fairness, about legacy, about keeping things simple. A faint smile. They'll hope you're too tired to read the fine print." I felt my jaw tighten slightly. He turned the camera toward the woods. "Everyone assumes this section is the least valuable," he said. "That's why I kept it intact." He walked a few steps, boots pressing into uneven ground. "The county's second infrastructure plan shifts west, not east." I sat up straighter. 2 years, he said. "Maybe sooner, if funding moves fast." 2 years. Robert's urgency suddenly made sense. They weren't racing for today's number. They were racing against tomorrow's announcement. Mark looked back into the camera. "I didn't sell because value isn't what something is worth now. It's what it becomes." He paused. "And I needed you to see that before anyone tried to rush you." The screen went dark. I didn't move right away. Instead, I reached for the surveys from the safe, laid them across the kitchen table, cross-referenced them with the public county infrastructure plan. The West Corridor would receive marina access, commercial frontage, service roads, traffic. It wasn't guesswork. It was timeline. And timeline belongs to whoever owns the clock. That afternoon, I called the Detroit attorney again. We spoke plainly. Holding company structure, long-term ground lease, retain ownership, control zoning approvals, no rush sale, No emotional split, just patience. When Tessa arrived that evening, she walked in slower than before, less reactive. "They're pushing hard," she said, setting her purse down carefully. "They mentioned a board meeting next month." I nodded. "I know. You do." "Yes." I poured her tea instead of answering immediately. Let the steam rise between us. "They're trying to close before that meeting," I said quietly. She stared at me. "How do you know all this?" I slid one of the infrastructure maps across the table. Her eyes widened. "Dad knew," she whispered. "Yes. And you?" "I'm learning." We sat with that. No rush. Later, we watched another video together. Mark stood at the dock, sunlight reflecting off the water. "If they question my clarity," he said gently, "remember something. I documented everything. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I didn't trust timing." Tessa blinked back tears. "He really thought this through," she murmured. "Yes," I said softly. "He did." Over the next week, I moved quietly. Filed notice of development interest. Met with a leasing consultant. Reviewed environmental compliance guidelines. No announcements. No threats. Just structure. Robert called 3 days before the county agenda was released publicly. "Elaine, we've received information about zoning movement," he said, voice controlled but tight. "This affects valuation." "I imagine it does," I replied. "We should finalize division immediately." "Why immediately?" I asked calmly. "Because delay creates risk." "For whom?" I said softly, a pause. "For everyone." I let that sit. "I won't be transferring anything," I said evenly. "You're making this difficult." I traced the rim of my coffee mug with my thumb. "I'm making it deliberate." Another silence. "You're underestimating how complicated holding land can become," he added. "I'm not underestimating anything," I said. That was the first time my voice carried a firm edge. Not loud, just anchored. He exhaled slowly. "You've been planning." "No," I said. "Mark planned." That landed harder than I expected. The call ended without resolution. And that told me everything. They didn't know how much I knew. And that uncertainty was leverage. That night, I walked to the western shoreline. The section everyone dismissed, the section they tried to split. The water lapped gently at the uneven rocks. Unimpressive at first glance, but positioned. That was the word. Positioned. The lake house he told me never to visit had become a lesson in positioning. Not loud power, not dramatic revenge. Just ownership held long enough for timing to mature. The county board meeting was set, 6 weeks out. I didn't need to accelerate. I just needed to hold. The stage was set. All I had to do was wait. And in that waiting, I felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not fear. Control. Because when you understand the map, you don't have to argue. You just let others reveal their urgency. And they were already revealing it. They just didn't realize how clearly. 6 weeks can feel long, unless you know someone else is racing. The county board meeting fell on a Tuesday evening. Nothing glamorous about it. Metal folding chairs, fluorescent lights, a coffee pot that had clearly been sitting there since noon. Tessa sat beside me, her knee bouncing slightly. I reached over and rested my hand on it. She stilled. The zoning update came halfway through the agenda. The West Corridor expansion was confirmed. Marina access permits approved. Service road funding secured. Commercial frontage reclassified. Not dramatic, just official. Property values projected to double within 2 years. Faster if private investors moved early. I didn't look around. I didn't smile. I wrote one word in the margin of the printed agenda. Timing. My phone buzzed before the meeting even adjourned. Robert. I let it go to voicemail, then texted him one line. The second valuation cycle just began. No punctuation, no explanation. That night, he came alone. No SUV, no brother, No third shadow in the background, just Robert. He stood at the edge of the dock, hands in his coat pockets. The lake was calm, the air cool. "You knew," he said quietly. "Yes. For how long?" "Long enough." He exhaled through his nose. "You could have told us." I looked at the water instead of him. "Why?" He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. "You structured something," he said finally. "An LLC?" I didn't confirm. "You retained ownership," he continued. "Ground lease instead of sale." Still silence from me. He studied my face. "You're not selling." "No. You're holding and leasing." I gave the smallest nod. "You read the filings." He almost smiled. "You've been busy." "No," I said gently. "I've been careful." That word shifted something. He stepped closer to the water's edge. "We misjudged you," he admitted. I folded my arms loosely, not defensive, just steady. "Yes," I said. "You did." There was no triumph in my voice, just truth. "You could have filed a complaint," he added after a moment. I watched a ripple move across the lake. I could have. The documentation in the safe had been enough, proof of early insider knowledge, pressure tactics, timeline manipulation. I never used it. I didn't need to. "You didn't," he said. "No." He nodded slowly. "You're going to be very wealthy from this." I looked back at the house, lights warm in the windows, studio glowing softly on the second floor. "It was never about that," I said. He frowned slightly. "Then what was it about?" I took a breath. It was about not being rushed. That seemed to land harder than anything else I'd said. He stood there a moment longer. The arrogance he carried when he first arrived weeks ago was gone, not replaced with apology, just awareness. "I suppose there's nothing left to negotiate," he said. "No," I replied softly. "There isn't." He gave a short nod. Then he turned and walked back up the path. No raised voices, no dramatic exit, just gravel shifting under his shoes. When the sound faded, I stayed on the dock. The lake reflected the dark sky like glass. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt unburdened. The lake house he told me never to visit had become the place where I finally understood restraint. I hadn't crushed anyone. I hadn't humiliated anyone. I had simply held my ground. And in that quiet holding, everything shifted. The lease agreements finalized the following week. Ownership intact, control retained, development moving forward under my terms. No headlines, no fireworks, just structure. And as I walked back toward the house that night, the porch light catching the edges of the railing, I realized something steady and deep. They thought I was defending land. I was defending timing. And when you protect timing, you protect yourself. The door closed softly behind me, and in that silence, I finally felt free. The morning after Robert left, I woke before the sun. No alarm, just habit. The house was quiet in that early grey way, when the world hasn't decided what it's going to be yet. I made coffee, measured the grounds, the way Mark used to, slightly too much. Some things don't need correcting. I carried the mug down to the dock, sat at the edge where he once stood with that camera. The water was smooth, unbothered. I thought about the first day I arrived here, how my hands shook when I turned that key, how I thought I was walking into memory. Instead, I walked into leverage. The lake house he told me never to visit became the place that taught me not to rush. Not when someone else wants you to. Not when grief makes you tired. Not when confidence comes dressed in a grey suit and polished language. Tessa comes most weekends now. She sets up her laptop on the porch table, takes calls, walks down to the dock when she needs quiet. Last Saturday, she stood in the studio doorway while I was painting. Really painting, brush in hand, music low. "You look like yourself," she said. I didn't answer right away. I wiped my brush on a cloth, stepped back from the canvas. I feel like myself, I said. That's different. The lease is in place. Long-term, environmentally monitored. Ownership intact. Cedar Hollow stays in our name. Not because I beat anyone, but because I didn't panic. Robert hasn't called in months. Alan sent one short email. Wishing you well with the development. Polite, neutral. That's enough. I don't need apology. I don't need revenge. I needed space. And I took it. Sometimes, near dusk, I walk to the western edge. The side everyone once dismissed. The side they tried to divide. I stand there and watch the light hit the water differently than it does on the east side. It's quieter there, less obvious, more strategic, and I smile a little. Because that's what they underestimated, not my anger, my patience. They thought I was weak because I was quiet. They confused stillness for surrender, but stillness can be preparation. The lake house he told me never to visit was never about hiding from the past. It was about stepping into my ground, holding it, without noise, without theatrics, without pretending I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done pretending. Done pretending grief made me fragile. Done pretending patience was passive. Done pretending I needed to shout to be heard. Peace feels different than victory. Victory is sharp. Peace is steady. Peace lets you sleep. Peace lets you paint. Peace lets you sit at the edge of a lake and breathe without waiting for the next phone call. And that's what Cedar Hollow gave me. Not wealth, not revenge. Clarity. And clarity is quiet power. Have you ever been underestimated and chosen patience instead of reaction? Tell me in the comments. I read them. If someone in your life needs a reminder that quiet strength is still strength, share this story with them. And if you want to sit with more stories like this, you're always welcome here. I'm glad you stayed.